Did you hear me? Welcome, everybody. Okay, so I think we can start. Welcome everybody again. Please keep muted at all times, and welcome to the ABIS Exploring Sustainable Futures with Serious Gaming. I would like to start off by giving the word to Ivo Matzer, the CEO of ABIS, the organization that is organizing this event, and for some introduction speech. Ivo, over to you.
Thank you, Katarina. Thank you. Dear guests, welcome at ABIS, the Academy of Business in Society. Welcome at this event. ABIS is for the people who don't know us yet or only a bit of it. We are an academic business network. And we are supporting sustainability by synergizing knowledge and experience of corporate and academic members. We are a membership organization. We do this to support sustainability, and the themes of sustainability, they can vary along a part of the need of our members. So we have sometimes for governance, corporate governance, and now we are focusing more on the circular economy. And we synergize this, we do this together with our members in research innovation projects, in publications, in events, in tailor projects, and of course, with a scenario exploration system. At ABIS, it's quite important that in the beginning, where we started our initiative a long time ago, we were in a stage of convincing and making awareness of sustainability or sustainable development. That's our name, Business in Society. And slowly we're moving towards more, trying to get more movement, more change. I think we don't have to convince that many people anymore in this direction, but it goes for how to do it, how to implement, and how to execute. It means that innovative interventions, or let's say innovative didactical methods, are really needed, because first of all, it brings people better understanding, deep understanding, and deep understanding is also the way to the solution, but also in a didactical way to make it very practical. And that's why we really are happy to use also the scenario exploration system for some years. We will talk about it, of course, later today. But it is really very nice to see how people get inspired and how people also are focused on actions, new paradigms, and playing the game. So in this field, we are really happy that we have so many people here in this session, because I think there's really the need in the world. And I think especially in the last year, we are finding out that there's a really need for action. Anything what could help in terms of playing, in terms of practicing and sharing and collaboration will work to make the future better. We will talk about it in the first session first. Before we start, I would like to give the floor again to Katarina, and again, enjoy this event, and I hope you have really nice lessons learned afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ivo, for your word. First of all, I would just like to say that we are at Zoom meetings. It means that we all see each other, which is really nice, and we all have the same possibilities. But I've seen that somebody just shared his screen recently, and I would like to ask you not to do that unless you are speakers or one of the ABIS teams. Thank you very much. And now I would like to focus on why do we organize this event. As ABIS, we have been playing the scenario exploration system in an academic setting for several years now, after a successful outcome of an EU project, EU Innovate, that we were part of. And even when we are bringing this value and this workshop to our members, we can still see that there is quite low awareness about the tool in our community. And secondly, we realize more and more the huge challenge that we have in front of us. We have to deal with climate change, with biodiversity loss, and of course, becoming more resilient to crises such as the one that we are facing right now. There is a need for urgent change, for more innovative practices, for more collaboration so that we can accelerate this transformation. The EU has put strategic foresight at the heart of policymaking as we are entering now the new era to achieve the transition to a more green, more resilient, and digital and fair Europe. Academia as well is on their pathway to integrate sustainability across their courses and are asking themselves how to change to educate the leaders to be a force for good. Businesses have also a huge role to play in this, as they will need to adopt more circular economy approaches and transition to sustainable business models. The scenario exploration system that we will be talking about today is providing with long-term thinking, with understanding the complexity of our socioeconomic system and engaging its participants in systemic thinking. It has many learnings and many outcomes, some of which are common and planned, and some of which are serendipitous. And it depends on what kind of setting they are being played at. And this is why it is a unique moment where we are bringing together the main and the principal designers of the scenario exploration system. Of course, the Joint Research Center at the European Commission, alongside researchers, professionals in gamification and foresight experts to discuss the development of the serious game, its initial objectives, and its lessons learned. And this will be following right away. To showcase the tool's versatility and the robustness and the ease of use, we are also welcoming here today the different users and the developers of the spin-off versions of the original SES game that were designed for a specific theme for stakeholders in academia, business, or policy. And just before we start, I want to say that the scenario exploration system is under the Creative Commons license, meaning that the game is open and free to use for everybody. It's free to download, and all the versions can be found on the European Commission's website. You will be able to find it in the chat very soon, the link, where you can find all the different versions. I am really happy to see 114 participants here with us at the moment, and actually it's still rising. We are having a lot of academics and researchers present, but also a lot of policymakers and representatives from civil society organizations and from businesses. And now, without further ado, I would like to give the word back to the moderator of the first session, Ivo Macer, and he will be introducing our speakers for the first session.
Thank you, Katarina. Well, the first session is, the title of the first session is From Foresight to a Serious Game. The purpose of this session is to go more deep in the origins of the scenario exploration system, to the goals, original goals, how it developed, what kind of lessons learned, and what we may expect in the future. And for this, we have three excellent speakers, experts. When we have a stage, I would ask you, of course, to give a big hand to them. Virtual, it is a bit difficult, but you have a big hand from all of us. And they all three are familiar and involved with the development of the scenario exploration system and are really experts in their field. I would like to welcome Alice Szczepanikova, Aaron Rosa, and Joan Sweeney. Alice is policy analyst in the European Commission Science and Knowledge Service, the Joint Research Center in Brussels. And she works on projects related to the future of migration and integration in Europe, trend analysis and social inequalities. She has been experimenting with new ways of stimulating forward-looking debates with policymakers and other stakeholders, including by using serious gaming. Then we have Rosa. Rosa has been working as a researcher at the Fraunhofer Institute for Systems and Innovation Research and the Competence Center Foresight since June 2016. And he is a principal designer of the scenario exploration system. He's been an active researcher and practitioner in the field of alternative futures and foresight since 2005, with a focus on developing games and interactive media as forms of enhanced participation of future-oriented activities. And we have Joan Sweeney. Joan Sweeney is visiting associate professor at Al-Farabi Kazakh National University in Almaty, Kazakhstan, and also senior research fellow at Westminster International University in Tashkent, Uzbekistan. John is a member of the World Future Studies Federation and the Association of Professional Futurists, as well as a co-founder of the Participatory Futures Global Swarm. Well, it's clear that we have here specialists in this intervention of gaming scenario systems and specialists in thinking and exploring the future. So again, welcome to this session, and we are really proud and honored that we have you as our guest speaker here. Thank you. I would like to give the floor first to Alice. Alice, please, we cannot wait listening to you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. It's a real pleasure to be here and to see so much interest in the scenario exploration system. When I joined the European Commission, the Joint Research Center, 6 years ago, I thought in one of the first meetings, I was exposed to the scenario exploration system, which by then was a developed tool with the help of Aaron and John and my colleague Laurent, who will be speaking in the afternoon. And I thought, how cool is that? I'm working in the European Commission and we're playing games. We're discussing future in this very innovative and interactive way. And since then, I myself developed one particular version of the scenario exploration system to do with the future of migration in the European Union. And I've seen this tool evolve and morph into different versions. And I've played it with so many different audiences, including introducing it to school, so university curricula, and it's been really an amazing experience to see how this thing can grow and how clearly it did respond to some kind of demand for this sort of a discussion platform that helps people, that helps in a way, I would say, democratize foresight. Because since then, I can say there's been the profile of foresight has been rising, and we can say in the EU context, the culmination of that rise was in 2019 with the new commission, where we had still have a vice president commissioner for foresight and interinstitutional relations. So by that it has been placed in the center of what European Commission wants to achieve. We see in other institutions, EU institutions, in European Parliament, and the Council, and also EU agencies, the importance of foresight is growing. And there's this understanding that also interinstitutionally, these institutions, they need to work together to strengthen the foresight capacity, including broadening this also to member states. So at the national level, there's also quite a lot of effort to look at the examples of countries that are more advanced in anticipatory governance and follow the model. So a lot is happening, and yet it takes time. It takes time to embed foresight in institutions. It takes time to see the results of any sort of organizational cultural change that can happen as a result of more forward-looking and more strategic thinking that trickles down from the small expert groups that build scenarios and discuss the future of whatever field, to any sort of policy officer, researcher, who actually, when they're doing their daily work, they can have some kind of broader picture. They can consider, what are the big trends that are likely to shape our future. What are the potential disruptive forces? I mean, we see the example of one quite clearly every day, but this hasn't necessarily been the case in the past. So these are the issues that really take time. And I think that the effort that was started with the scenario exploration system to make this way of thinking broadly available to people who may not really be motivated or have time to read Foresight reports or follow Foresight, to be part of those expert groups that produce Foresight knowledge. So this tool is making that broadly available and really mainstreaming it into different areas. And I think that's why it's particularly important to have that. And I think also beyond, the sort of the possibility to explore any particular issue in the context of scenarios, to see it from the perspective of other actors. That is something which is very valuable. We don't always, it's basically building empathy and active listening and enabling people who may be more used to, listening to themselves than listening to others, presenting the position of your institution in the policymaking world. This is not uncommon. That really puts them in the situation where they're forced to listen to the others and sometimes even put themselves in the shoes of others. So I think these are all kinds of skills and capacities that this tool helps to develop that are very, very useful in policymaking, but also beyond that. As part of education, imagine if young people are used to these kinds of serious games, when they enter their professional life, it will become sort of natural to think this way and to introduce it into their work lives as well. So I think there's an investment, be it from educational institution policymaking, but also in the field of business, embedding the role of business in broader society, which is exactly what the scenario exploration system does, is potentially a very useful thing. So just to finish off, thank you very much. I'm glad to see that we can have this structured discussion and that we have accumulated this community of people who used the scenario exploration system or are interested in using it. And I'm looking forward to the discussion with the other speakers and the audience.
Thank you, Alice. Thank you. Thank you for sharing your experiences. We'll come back later, of course. Maybe for the audience, for a good understanding, that maybe just one question. The exploration is not the same as prediction, right?
Yes, that's one part of this change, cultural change that will take some time. It's this sort of more aligned understanding of what Foresight can do. It cannot predict. It can help us to see the future in a more structured, systemic way,
okay.
But not to predict the future.
Thank you. I think that's very important for people that they understand, okay, this is not kind of a glass ball or glass. Okay, thank you. Thank you. I would like to give the floor to Aaron. Aaron, welcome again. Please, also for you, we cannot wait listening to you.
Okay, thanks. Welcome everybody. It is great to be able to be given this opportunity to present to you all a bit about serious games, the scenario exploration system. I think it's really quite a surprise to be here 6 years after the scenario exploration system kind of launched. I can still remember some of the first meetings with John and Laurent and going over the basic idea, like, why are we going to make this game? What is the purpose? And one of the key reasons was, well, we have this great report and nobody's going to read it. And how do we create something that encourages people to approach the content that's in this research in a playful manner? And I think, yes, so I've been doing futures and foresight for a long time, and as was just mentioned, like, doing futures and foresight is not about predicting, it's about utilizing the future in a way, exploring the future, creating and imagining the future in a rigorous fashion. And that's what was in the report. They had done that work, and our work was then to translate it into something that's more interactive and approachable for a wide range of possible participants and stakeholders. So serious games, I think, in general, and all games, the first most fundamental thing that they do is they create a safe place for play. And I'll go a little bit into both of those. A safe place is a place where people have agreed upon rules and the consequences for their actions are low. And that encourages play in terms of how can play really be formulated as more experimentation. So people testing out their capabilities within this system, people testing out their cognitive theories of like, how does this model work? How does this thing that I'm approaching interact? If I do X, does Y happen or something completely different? And creating a safe place for experimentation enables people to figure out how to work towards goals. And that really is the exploration part that the SES kind of chose to really explore. In each of the scenarios, the conditions and the environment are vastly different. So if you have a goal, and that was one of the first steps of every SES game, establish a goal. Now learn about this possible world of the future. How does your goal maybe change? How does your strategy to get to that goal change? And the SES was designed to do that because we at the very beginning made some radical design decisions, which was, we set down what's the goal of the game. Well, we want people to be able to familiarize themselves with the broader scope of the content inside of the report. We want it to be fun, so they should be incentivized to learn more about each of the worlds that they're in. And then how, from a game design perspective, can we use the different elements of the games, the mechanics of the game, the different narrative arcs that are there, the aesthetics, the roles, the actions, how can we use all of those elements into and design a system that really propels every participant towards our goal from a design perspective, which was familiarizing themselves with futures, alternative futures, and the results of this report. So that was kind of the thinking and how we took the concept of serious game and applied it here within the JRC's work. And again, I think it's really exciting that we're having this conversation today, because back when this all started, it was playful and we were hopeful, but I don't think any of us quite imagined that there would be this response. So I'll hand it over to back to you, Ivo.
Thank you, Aaron. Interesting. We will listen later also to the radical decision you have to take in the game. It's really nice to share this, I think. We will continue with Joan. Joan, also, we cannot wait to listen to you, to your experiences. Please, Joan, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you so much, Ivo. And thank you for the invitation to share today. It's really an honor and a pleasure to be here with Alice and Aaron, and also for everyone that's going to be sharing later. I also want to recognize the immense contribution of Laurent. Like, I don't think any of us would be here today without his passion and his commitment. And I mention that because when I reflect on this experience, and I think to speak to Aaron's point, it's kind of unimaginable that this is happening. It's sort of like, you've been away from something and seen it grow and mutate over a long period of time. So it's really quite extraordinary to see a real community develop out of this. And the reason I want to really pay attention and call attention to Laurent's contributions is, I think for games and other things like this to really work, especially inside an organization like the JRC, it requires a lot of strong championing. So you really need someone who's going to be able to own it and to spread it and to be a hub, if you will, in a broader network. I also, speaking to the context of networks, something that Aaron had mentioned to kind of build off this, we had two really difficult tasks. The aim was, of course, to build a gaming experience for that particular project, but also to build a platform that was quite elastic. And I think, as you'll hear later from some of the others who will present their experiences with it, the SES kind of found that sweet spot in that it can be, manipulated and molded according to different themes and different topics. I think another aspect that's quite critical to mention here that really is driving the points home that Alice and Aaron had brought up is that, you know, the big difference here is that scenarios are two-dimensional. So unless you're writing them and someone else is reading them, how do you actually engage? What's the actual touch point? And so what I love about the SES as a platform is you don't just get to talk about uncertainty, you get to feel it. You get to inhabit the space of those worlds, and you actually get to then walk into those futures. And so I think the real benefit of the platform, and one of the challenges that we had in prototyping, was precisely to have that experience where people could inhabit and add to and also grow very organically the kinds of personas and the kinds of perspectives that make those scenario experiences very rich. And so for us, it was really an intensive prototyping process where we're cutting out cards, where we were running different rooms with different game set models to really try to find the right kind of approach to building a dynamic gaming experience. And I think one of the other lessons there was, you know, just like a good soup, which sometimes is always better or the next day, is to let it sit and come back to it. So for us, there was a lot of learning in giving ourselves time to be able to test, prototype, test again, and really to go back into the kitchen, so to speak. And there were moments where decisions we'd made previously really needed to be rethought based on a prototyping experience. And so I think it's a real testament to the fact that we were the first project of, at the time, what was a new policy lab, that the JRC really wanted to own the space of not just talking about doing things differently, but actually doing them quite differently. And I say doing them differently, given that I think I might have showed up for my first meeting in an Aloha shirt with a jacket over it. So here comes these two guys, right? Sort of, you know, we're both finishing our PhDs at the time, you know, with, you know, some experience doing games and very rough games, right? Live action role play. We'd had one project with the government of Singapore. And so there was a lot of risk, I think, there. I think I can say that now looking back, that, you know, here these guys come in with these crazy ideas and yeah, let's build a game out of our JRC scenarios project. But they went for it and they owned it and they supported it and they grew it and they nurtured it. And I think that's the real message here, is that taking the time to invest in the process, trusting the process, enabling people to really go with the process produces magical things. And I think games are really critical for those opportunities to grow and to, as Alice said, democratize futures and foresight and feel like there aren't barriers. I think like most experiences, you don't read the rule book before you play, you kind of learn by doing. So there's a really natural way to engage people in thinking about the future. And it really does activate the natural kind of anticipatory abilities and capacities that we all have. And so that's what I think is really powerful about the experience and what I'm happy to share. I would love to talk more about. So again, thank you for the opportunity to share, and I look forward to keeping the conversation going.
Thank you, John. I played this game now a few times myself, first as a kind of just playing the game like a participant. And the more you think about it, the more you want to know about the background, all the concepts behind. So I would like to share that playing it, first of all, but we will talk later about this, it's a totally different dimension of gaming. You learn really a lot also about you learn quite some about yourself, and you really want to dig deeper in all kind of knowledge and insights about scenarios even after you play the game. It's really interesting how that works. So we have a few questions prepared, also some questions for the audience. First, I will ask one of you a question, but please, if you want to add what your colleague in the panel said, please do. Don't make it too linear. But let's find a kind of dialogue, the four of us. My first question is about the very first initiative. Alice, maybe you could start with that. There are different DGs, directorates within the European Commission, who, what I understand, in parallel had a kind of need for this kind of foresights, this kind of methods. Can you give some background how that worked?
Yes, so the very first example where we really engaged closely with the policymakers, that it was my colleague at the time, was with the DG Santé. So they were dealing with issues around food safety. And there was a unit that really took it to the heart, the fact that, you know, this field is changing, and they wanted to explore a bit how their work and their sort of policy area is likely to develop. And luckily, there was a report being produced by the JRC, again, producing scenarios, and just shows you a little bit how flexible this scenario exploration system is. So what happened was then those scenarios, this new set of scenarios was used as sort of applied to the SES without necessarily changing, you know, the overall architecture of the tool. There were some changes, of course, to some of the cards, some of the parameters, but that took place quite quickly. And then, because the particular unit in DG Santé was very committed to this, they really prepared for it, and they it was one of the very few examples, not very few, but one of the examples where the actors active in the game actually sort of played themselves, right? So that was really good, because there you have very rich experience, you know, and they explored what their work might look like in the future in those different scenarios, and then drew conclusions that they need to draw from this. So I think that was one particular example where we could see impact in policymaking. I can't tell you, maybe Laurent could, but I can't tell you to what extent it really shaped their work afterwards, which is one of the things that are not so easy to put your finger on, as it is with many of these engagement tools, you know, things that, you know, spark somebody's imagination or make people realize how things are, and to draw the line between that moment and some actual change in the future is not easy. And we were not able to do that, and I don't think anybody is. But certainly that was a good example. There are other then of course this tool kind of grew and was used by different DGs. And then I can speak from my own experience. So we developed a migration version of that, and I was presenting it to different stakeholders, different policymakers in migration field. And there's this really brilliant idea that came up in the network of member states, all EU member states working on migration issues, who said, well, it's all nice you're doing this for, you know, policymakers to have a forward-looking view on migration, but what we actually need is we need to educate young people about these issues, because they're living in this highly politicized field where migration is being used by populists. It's being, you know, there's lots of misinformation around migration. They need to be more resilient to all these messages, and they need to be able to see the complexity of this topic. And so from then, 2 years later, we do have a very, you could say, transformed and simplified version of the scenario exploration system, which will be launched soon in secondary schools to educate young people about the migration and integration issues. And there are other examples that could be mentioned, but I'll stick to these two for the time being.
Maybe, so how you explain, so for policy making, what you answered is that it's also, I would say, independent from any kind of industry or sector. Could someone explain, because if you think about exploring the future, people may think, okay, this is industry specific, or this is subject specific. How does it work that you can use this system in any subject or industry?
Well, it depends what your objective is, right? So a lot of the scenarios that the scenario exploration system works with are fairly general. So they're not referring only to one particular area, but they're kind of describing different possible futures for the world. And so how you situate yourself as the business representative, or, you know, a policymaker or the public, that really largely depends on what sort of debate you want to have. So in that sense, I think it's it can be applied to any area. But it's really the important part is one should know what they want to achieve with this tool, right? So that's an important thing, because it does require some level of investment. And if you're making this investment, it's good to know why you're doing it and what do you want to get out of it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. John, please.
Yes, I wanted to jump in and just highlight and talk a little bit about something that Alice had mentioned. You know, how do you evaluate the impact of these tools? How do you know that they are doing what either they're intended to do or they're doing something? There are, of course, some really great case studies about using games in very tactical situations or in strategic, right? And of course, there's a long history of serious games and wargaming and now business wargaming and using them in different sort of, approaches. I will say, and this is actually in part, and me saying it publicly means I have to follow up on it. Laurent has been for years collecting all of the pre and post surveys that have been done in relation to the SES sessions that he's run. So we actually have this amazing data set, this longitudinal assessment of the tool, looking at how people have used it, how their experience is, and I hope that he'll talk maybe a bit about that later. And we're hoping to be able to bring that together. We've been a bit slow to publish it. And of course, there are already some other articles talking about the applicability of the tool. But I think we'd like to bring a little more rigor to the assessment and the evaluation aspect to show how this is affecting individuals, but also how it's, spurring other things, of course, like this conversation, and then of course, being able to shift policy planning or strategy for different organizations. So that's something that's very much in process, and we're hoping to be able to further that, hopefully, and I'm gonna say in the next few months to give ourselves a little bit of time, but we're continuing to work on that. It'd be great to publish that research.
Thank you. I think we all see that Laurent is quite active in the chat. So he sends a lot of messages, so please check all of you. Thank you, John. Another question is that maybe this question for Aaron, but please jump in if you like. The game is set for long-term thinking. What I know is what 10, 20, 30 years, long-term thinking. Is it also possible in this long-term thinking to go for a short-term decision, how to get a kind of direction in 10, 20, 30 years in kind of balance with short-term? What is your experience or what's your recommendation here?
Yeah, that is actually a really great question, and it ties in nicely to the conversation that we've been having, which is how does this system or any serious game really, how can it speak to a specific set of needs? So if you need to make a simulation or an experience that is very clearly focused on a particular sector or a particular strain of policy, and if you don't have, the kind of luxury of saying, well, we're really just considering 30 years out. No, you need decisions now, and you know that they're going to have an impact 5 years down the road. One thing that John had mentioned and went into the SES at its very initial stages was, we're going to develop an adaptive system, right? This is a platform. And so it takes content and it provides a structure for that content to be placed within and then run in a social simulation type of a way. So there are certain pieces of the SES that, we set different time horizons, and along different time horizons, the conditions changed to tell the story of the scenarios. And then we also introduced the concept of chance and kind of, wild cards, literally named so in the game, which is great. But yeah, I mean, to take any kind of a scenario that's 30 years out and apply it to decisions today and try to work through, what are the implications? This system and lots of gaming systems, they work best because they foster and engender a dialogue. They open up spaces of conversation between different stakeholders and different perspectives. And again, they do it in that safe space of a game so that there's lower consequences if there's a failure, but you can get a lot out of those conversations. One thing in the SES was the economy, right? There was a limited number of resources that people could use on every turn and through the duration of the game. But that really helped people, again, make those decisions. Collaboration was built in and incentivized in the game so that having different stakeholder groups work together helped propel people further in the game. And those are the kinds of design decisions that were implemented so that coming back out of the game, you had kind of the sense already of, okay, what can we pursue and what can we monitor? And if we say, well, we need to work with this group, let's start this conversation. We don't have all the money in the world. We have a limited budget, but from our experience inside the game, this seemed like there was a synergy between this relationship. Let's go forward. And yeah, it's not a predictive tool. It's an exploratory tool. Maybe John or Alice, do you want to speak some more to that?
Maybe to focus also on, maybe this is we will soon play this game with corporates in Central Eastern Europe. So then we expect to have only people from the business sector in the group. And what you just explained, and maybe John or Alice can also elaborate on that, if that to create a mindset of an exploration is quite a big step. If, especially from business sector, people are planning in a kind of forecasting way, and they see only one future. That's the tradition of strategic management. So we are predicting, forecasting, and this is a mental shift. I think that maybe you can share your experiences, that the exploration is more important than the strategy. Who could?
No, Alice, please go ahead.
No, it's just saying that I think one of the most effective learning outcomes is that you do the exploration as a sort of a byproduct, right? So it's not like, now we're going to tell you what are the alternative futures, which is basically the format of reports, Foresight reports. You know, these are the 4 scenarios, and you know, read through them and think what they mean for you. What you do in the game is, you know, you do so many different things at the same time, and it's quite demanding. You know, you're really sort of tired after the 3 hours. But what you do is, so you have to assume a particular role, you have to develop your own strategy, and by the way, you have to situate yourself into that world, which is sort of drafted by one of the scenarios. And I think in that way, it's really effective, because it kind of pushes you into this way of thinking, and you have to interact, you have to listen to the others. You can't just, you know, be passive absorber of information. This is what people are often used to. So that way, it is very challenging, but I think it leaves a mark, and that's how I think we business leaders, students, or policymakers, you know, it does affect people in a particular way.
Yes, and the only thing I would add there is that what's been extraordinary is to see it played within different cultural contexts, and to see the way that it does provide a gathering space to be able to, again, across different contexts, and certainly in a very localized way, talk about the relationships between government and business, and, you know, civil society and startups and students. And so to have those roles be quite diverse, and to bring and invest that into an exploration of possible futures, again, provides a lot of richness. I think the one thing that's been quite extraordinary is to see the adaptability, again, not just with regards to theme, but also with regards to audience. And I think, actually, to speak to kind of the broader sense of movements within Futures and Foresight, you know, having this being owned by the JRC and seeing its applicability has really helped to legitimate, I think, more broadly this practice. So I know for Aaron and myself, you know, we were screaming from the mountaintops that we had just done a project with the JRC, and that it was a game. And so I think that also created a sense for others that, oh, if the JRC is doing this, and we should look at games as well. And so I think certainly within Futures, there's a long history of using games, but it's sort of, you know, ebbed and flowed according to a variety of factors. But now to see it something that, again, is working across policy, across business, and used by different communities around the world, I think, again, is a testament to the kinds of ways that a community can be grown around this. And again, this doesn't work for all tools, but I think the gaming approach adds a lot of utility and a lot of efficacy to getting people to experience Futures and Foresight.
John, talking about this, you in your introduction, you mentioned that the prototyping process, the testing, going forward. What kind of things made it in the development of the game that you have to move back before you went forward? Could you, are there some situation to share with us?
Yeah, the one thing I'll mention really quickly, and I would love to hear Aaron's and Alice's thoughts about this, is, Aaron mentioned trying to get the economy right. It took us a really long time to try to get the sweet spot with regards to the specifics, flow of the economy, or the kind of starting conditions for the economy within the game. And then one thing that was also quite interesting was the balance between competition and collaboration. Of course, that really has a lot to do with the players and has a lot to do with context. But we really went back and forth with how do we create the conditions for those to emerge, and those to emerge in very sort of organic ways. And so I think when we were looking at some of these options and models and doing A/B game testing, and by doing A/B, I mean literally in one room it's this version of the rules, in another room it's this version of the rules, and some of us are running back and forth saying, hey, try this, hey, try that. That it was that kind of live prototype testing approach that had a lot of value for us. So we real time would shift things versus morning versus afternoon. And so that kind of action learning cycle and bringing that to the process, I thought allowed us to get the balance right on competition and collaboration, and allowed us to refine things like the economy of the game.
Maybe Aaron, you want to add something here?
Yeah, and I'm gonna kind of mold my response to one of the questions that was in the chat, which is like, how do you build the sense of exploration into the game itself? Let's see, it was from Stylianos, yeah. Influencing their exploration or priming them for the exploration mode. A lot of that, I think, was built into the way that the game was set up, so the game flow itself. Okay, so I believe, and check me if I'm wrong, I haven't actually played myself in a while, but there was a bit of okay, everybody, you're going to choose a role. You're going to be business, you're going to be public sector, you're going to be government. Great. Let me read you a bit about this world that you're about to be entering into. And so there's a storytelling component, and it helps people. First, they're defining their roles. They're saying a business. Well, what kind of business? Here's a card. Tell us some details. What's the name of the business? What are you into? Or what type of policy are you helping to craft? So there's this constant back and forth between presenting something from the game to the players and then having them create for themselves their space within it, their narrative. And a lot of that goes back and forth in terms of asking them to explore on their own initiative between the players and then the game system itself. So then with the economy as being just, again, one of these mechanics, getting that right through prototyping was really important. And what we ended up doing was having a dynamic economy where different roles started with different amounts of resources, and then there were different rules in terms of each scenario. Who did it cost? Which roles would it be more beneficial to be or more costly to be in each scenario, given that the policy conditions, the environment is different in each scenario. So there was really a lot of detailing to help make the exploration mode very real for the players, but then also when they rewound it in their head and say, what did I take from that session? Oh, I learned a lot about the potential consequences of policy that's under discussion today. So it was, yeah. I don't know if I answered the initial question, but I wanted to say that stuff.
Maybe Alice, do you want to add here something to comment? Okay, and a very important dimension of the game is collaboration. You mentioned it also a few times. How did you design this collaboration dimension of the game? That gaming, in many cases, gaming is to have individual kind of result or achievement. How did you bring it in this far that collaboration is really a key issue? Why and how did you do it? Who would, maybe Aaron or Joan?
I can start really quick and then hand over to John. To answer kind of the why is because there was an interest in saying, okay, we want to work with multiple stakeholder groups, and the underlying belief was that people will be able to accomplish bigger and greater things working in concert with one another. You don't have to, you know, collaborate closely, but even just aligning kind of strategies and, you know, the action cards from, again, from media and the action cards from policy, if they can align those strategies in a narrative way, tell each other stories and convince the game master, yeah, that's a feasible collaboration. So you can go forward with the game mechanics in terms of economy. But the idea was that more can be accomplished through collaboration. So we want to encourage that without losing competition as an element.
Yeah, and the thing I would add there is that that's another element as well, that in our testing, we tweaked and we wanted to create the conditions for collaboration to emerge. And certainly there were moments where one particular player in early games was quite you know, tyrannical and had lots of power and was wielding that power, or you had the public, you know, being very strong in their assessment and quite critical. So again, all the gaming sessions are quite different. And I think in that intensive prototyping and testing process, we really wanted to find that sweet spot. And still to this day, I imagine there are some players who come in with this really kind of competitive, you know, aim and want to win the game versus those who, you know, are maybe naturally more inclined. And actually that's a really critical aspect of the debrief. You know, we talk about the game, but the game is really part of a broader process that you can use. And so taking time afterwards to reflect and asking the players to be able to reflect, and then reflecting as a group on what, you know, how did you play and why, and this decision. And so it allows you to really then have a map, if you will, of the experience and to go over that. And so I think that's where our intention was to create the conditions of possibility for there to be this collaboration, but also to allow it to be something later that you could reflect back on and imagine, well, if we didn't collaborate, you know, what effect might that have had, or how might this have looked differently? And I think, again, I think we found that sweet spot, but I also know that it's highly variable relative to theme and relative to players. And so, you know, each game sort of as its own entity can look quite different, even if you have the intention with a particular type of design or gameplay model.
And another question is, playing the game, you play the game in a scenario. Is there something designed, maybe Alice could think about the answer to this question, how participants can compare scenarios, and what kind of learnings could there be just because of comparing the scenario that you played?
Yeah, so the basic design of the game is that you first play within one scenario. So it's a particular future that you're put into, and as an actor, you know, business representative, civil society, policymaker, you develop your strategy, you think about collaborating with others, etc., trying to achieve a particular purpose there. And it's also a bit, the first one is always a learning process. You get familiarized with the rules of the game and how things work. And then once you've done that, you do the same thing, but in a completely different future, which is usually the logic of the SES is to, you know, pick the most different future where you kind of pursue the same strategy with the similar actors, but the context is completely different. And this is where the learning comes in, you know. So you see that, you know, with the same parameters, but a different future, the dynamic may change dramatically. And that is really interesting because we can talk about exploring the future, but the future hasn't happened yet. So we don't really know what it's going to be, and it can go in different directions. And this contrast of the two scenarios that you're placed in, and you have to find your way, it really shows you the level of unpredictability, but also by then debriefing and thinking about commonalities, you know, what worked well in both scenarios. You know, this is where you can get to some, you know, also important learning points about, you know, sort of no regrets kind of solutions that you might want to consider. And I just want to add maybe a little bit on what John was saying. I think one aspect that is sometimes underestimated. So people learn about, oh, we have a game about the future, so let's do it. You know, people's curiosity goes up, and then you can do it as a one-off experience, which is not bad. But if you put a little bit of extra time into preparation, the benefits are going to be much bigger. And yes, it is like 3 hours of the time to play the game, you need a trained game master. So there is some level of investment. But if you do the extra step and you actually prepare, let's say you prepare your roles, you get familiar with the topic, and you also allocate the right time for the debrief and for the discussion, as a whole package, you get much more out of it. So whoever is considering here in the audience using it, I would suggest, go beyond the 3 hours, invest more and you will get out more.
Thank you. That's really, I totally agree with you with the game master. The role of the game master is very important. We invested a huge time in our ABIS team for the competences of the game master, also understanding, because this is really the big part of the educational part of it, I think. But talking about the scenarios, which means the scenarios are the future context, right? And is it possible that that different contexts are possible or maybe more relevant in some countries compared to other countries? So can you also compare scenarios by say, okay, this scenario is for country A and this scenario country B, and now we play? Would that be possible? Who wants to take this? Maybe Aaron?
Sure. Yeah, that's a good question. Again, you can do a lot with the system itself. So if you wanted to set up roles in advance, like Alice said, and prepare some of the content to be more specific to a particular nation or to a particular role in a totally different context, you do benefit from that. If you have a targeted goal that you know that you want every one of your players to have achieved at the end in terms of, testing out policy strategies between two different nations within a greater regional context, within the EU context, within the global context, you can kind of layer those elements of content in and prepare them in advance. So the system itself is meant to be flexible. It's meant to allow a researcher team or an engagement team to say, okay, these are the questions we want to explore, we want to get people's feedback on. Here's how we're going to craft the content to encourage that type of interaction with the system and with each other, so that people are learning about this, they're answering for themselves these questions, and we're observing in, again, the debrief. I can only underscore what John and Alice have already said. That's really where the magic happens, right? That's where the rubber hits the road and people come out and they say, okay, I'm not in a fantasy anymore. Now I'm back in the here and now, but I learned a lot. What did I learn? What did you learn? What did you learn? What did we learn together? That is really so essential to having people articulate, well, what were their experiences reinforcing, or what did they learn that was new about the context that they're in? And so if you're saying, well, we have nation A and nation B, and we want to find out how they'd approach very different goals within a policy context, you can set that up in advance, but and you can set up multiple scenarios to kind of see what those changes are, but it's really the conversation afterwards to say, well, this was a surprising thing that came out in gameplay, this was expected, and this was something unexpected. Yeah. Anybody else? John? Yeah.
Yeah, the one thing I would add there is to speak to some of what Aaron is saying is, there is an opportunity with the tool to test different scenario methods, right? So, you need scenarios to make the game work, to run the platform. So, you could experiment potentially with different models for creating scenarios and see how that would affect it. And then Ivo, to speak to your question directly, you could also, run, regional scenarios here, global scenarios here, national level scenarios, and see what it produces. So I think actually in some ways the surface is still being scratched for seeing how the tool might be able to augment classical scenario planning approaches, or the idea of using scenarios in a policy planning or development or sort of strategy development process. And I think that's where, again, the real opportunities lie. And I know later we're going to see some examples of different projects and different contexts having used it. But I think it goes back to this kind of question around, how are we creating processes that allow people to engage and allow people to not just talk about these kinds of skills, but to actually utilize them as part of these, exploration processes.
Mm-hmm. Alice, I see you. Okay. Before we go to the question of our audience, last question for now at least, because I think go the whole afternoon here, is that we talk many times about leadership. I don't want to make it really vague, but let's see it, try to make it specific. What is your experience in terms of leadership in different levels? You don't have to be a leader of a big company, you also are leading yourself. So in terms of leadership, what are your main experiences? And I would ask this question to all three of you in the behavior of the participants or the players. Maybe Alice?
Yes, so the game setting is a sort of a social experiment, right? You put people in an unnatural situation and basically let them play their roles, and while they're doing it, their personality comes out. In a way, it's kind of a leveling experience because you can play it with your boss, and you all have, you all follow the rules. You have the same sort of space to improvise and to be creative, and that's just a nice social experience. You can forget about the hierarchies and about the protocols for a bit. And you really see people's personalities come out. There are people who are very competitive suddenly, they go for the winning. And there are different ways of winning in the SES. This is a nice thing about it. So some people go for the points, right? There is a scoring, and then you win or lose based on how many points you've accumulated. There are different ways of winning in a sense of, have I achieved my goal? Have we all collectively achieved some kind of, let's say, more sustainable future? So this is also a nice way to see, the different lines and different levels of reflection in the game. But it is really a learning experience also to, find out about people you're working with and just have nice time together, because it's not very often that you actually have this luxury of, putting yourself in either in the shoes of others or reflecting on the future with your colleagues or with people you work with. So it's a really fruitful experiment, you could say, that can push, to just also create more trustful relations with your stakeholders.
It's a nice cliffhanger, trust, right? John, your take on leadership?
Yeah, so I think to resonate with Alice's point, there's an adage by the mentor that Aaron and I had at the University of Hawaii, Jim Dater, who says that, the future doesn't count because the future doesn't vote. So, getting specifically policymakers to be able to be empathetic to the needs of future generations is a dynamic challenge, right? They're always trying to put out the fires of yesterday and today. So how do you flip reactive governance and try to make it more anticipatory? And I think, as Alice and others have mentioned, it's really about enhancing the sense of empathy. So I think there is a real reflective learning experience that comes from being able to walk into the future in someone else's shoes and seeing the dynamics that can emerge between these different kinds of groups. And so I think from certainly a leadership perspective, and this doesn't only apply, I think, to policy, I think certainly within, business space, and then certainly if you think about sort of civil society, like the opportunity to really have a chance to inhabit those roles, to understand what are the challenges and the limitations relative to, again, what is an imbalanced power dynamic. And again, that's an intentional aspect of the game. And to be able to work through that and be able to anticipate, to confront uncertainty, to realize a card might be flipped over and the entire game looks and feels very differently. Or, the public says something and all of a sudden the whole feeling of the game is changed. And to be able to react and to be able to adapt to that is no doubt one of the critical skills that we need in our leaders. And certainly, more broadly, and I know there's some conversations in the chat, there have been lots of engagements. And of course, Alice spoke directly to this, of making the SES for youth and getting youth to be able to play through this and to enhance that. So I think leadership at different levels, or the concept of leadership as of course, a reflective practice, is something that the game really helps to support, and to bring a real sense of foresight to that, I think, is really quite critical.
Thank you, John. Aaron, maybe also from the design perspective?
Oh, okay, sure. So let's see. I was formulating a thing about leadership.
No, please continue. No, just.
Well, I think that, okay, and I'm not an expert in what leaders are and who they are, but I feel that leaders are often kind of, they shoulder the task of being the carrier, the carriers of the fire, right? The safe holders of, you know, whatever it is that's going to sustain their business or their organization. And it's usually a vision, like this is where we're heading. These are our principles, these are our values, and this is how we're going to move those forward in time. And I think it's really a challenging time for leaders across all kind of sectors in terms of there's all this uncertainty and there's this new emergent complexity, right? Like, I mean, like, oh, we didn't realize that these things were connected. Now we know that they are connected. And so what the game in a way does is enables and helps people to kind of build this idea of futures literacy, which I believe is a 21st century leadership skill. It's a mandatory thing. Plurality of futures, recognizing and really empathizing with there are lots of different people and organizations and cultures, and they all have a different idea of what the future should be, and they're working towards that. Being comfortable going across those different perspectives, taking those into account, either in, you know, again, safeguarding your own vision or adapting it and changing it to make it bigger and make the kind of the tribe larger and stronger to foster a vision forward. I think the game starts that process. It takes the kind of burden of responsibility off for a little bit and says, let's just do some role playing. What if you were somebody else outside of the leader, or try to be a leader, even if that's not something that you're normally asked to be? And I think the game, from a design perspective, does that relatively well in the role crafting and asking people, you know, take on this role, make it your own, and go forward into this unknown future and see what happens. Yeah.
I can see that. Yes, very clear. Thank you.
Yep.
Let's move forward to our audience. We have some pre-received questions, but I'm also looking to my colleague Carolina. She is collecting many questions, I think. Carolina, shall we start first with some pre-received questions, and then you pop in if you have an interesting question also what's currently asked, right?
Yes, thank you so much, Ivo, and thank you to the speakers. I could be listening to this all day long, but we have also some very interesting questions, both that we received before and here in the chat. So I will try to avoid maybe picking the questions that have been already answered in one way or the other. So there were some questions that we received before linked to policy. So maybe Alice could speak some more to that, how this game and serious gaming in general has been adopted within the European Commission. And talking about other adaptations, there is a lot of interest in developing new versions of the game. So some participants were asking about what are the key aspects that should be taken into account when developing a new one, and whether there is a roadmap available. And one last.
First for this one?
So I have one more maybe that I can put on the table, or
okay.
Which is also linked to the one before. So it's about like the specific focus of the game. How can this game help in transforming Foresight outcomes in more concrete decisions and plans? So adoption in policy, is there any roadmap available to developing new versions of the game? And how can this be helpful to take more forward-looking action?
Okay, I'll start. Policy adoption, I mean, it did depend largely on our active promotion of the tool within the European Commission and other EU institutions. And there was a lot of interest, that's for sure. Sometimes you could see the, you know, the difficult trade-offs that some people had to make. So when told that it takes 3 hours, you clearly, you know, there's a difference between people who are willing to go deeper into a topic and have a new experience and willing to invest in that, and then this sort of very short attention span that is quite common for the way many institutions work, and then 3 hours is just too much. So a typical question would be, could we do it in an hour and a half? Or, you know, could we do it even shorter? So a lot about the, you know, also related to the last question, you know, how can it really impact decisions and plans? It really depends on how seriously you take this and how much you want to invest in this. So do you have enough champions in different institutions who are willing to take this forward and who are willing to promote its use? Because yes, it takes time, and for it to deliver tangible results, you do have to make an investment. Like with anything, you know, it's not a silver bullet. It's gonna, you know, make your policy actions future-proof. No, you do have to make an investment, and then depending on that, you can benefit from it more or less. So that's about the answer to the first and third question. And about these new versions, so on the website that was shared, there are a number of different versions that already exist. So for some of these, depending on your topic, you don't need to reinvent the whole thing, right? So you can choose those that are already out there. Also in the one, I can speak for my own work on the migration version. There is a report about the future of migration in the European Union. And in that report, the second part of the report is basically devoted to different ways of actively using scenarios that we developed in various discussion platforms, the SES being one of them. And there we produce really sort of a step-by-step recipe book kind of document that guides you through the process. So there's both a step-by-step in using the SES, but there's also a step-by-step in developing the scenarios, even in a sort of one day, you know, really short way, or even half-day scenario workshop. And then you have, you know, those scenarios that you can then apply in the SES, and you can develop your own version. So as always, you know, the amount of investment will be correlated with the quality of the product. But if you have short time and you still want to adjust it to your own needs, it is possible, and there are guidelines to do that available.
Thank you. Maybe John and Aaron, your vision on these questions.
Maybe I could jump in quickly. I think one of the things that's been most compelling, and this touches on different elements of the questions, is, you know, recently the OECD had put out their report on sort of, you know, the trends in anticipatory governance, and they actually noted the SES. And I think, again, what that speaks to is this kind of question around how the JRC and how the Commission really brought it into their work. I mean, on the one hand, I love the fact that, you know, 5 years ago it was this radical idea, and I actually like now that it's just normal. It's just not this, you know, crazy, ridiculous thing. It's just a part of all of these projects that have happened, and the fact that people are developing it and different versions are coming out, I think is, again, you know, hitting on this really critical point about, you know, this idea that's really central to the SES, which is giving back. So the fact that it's under the Creative Commons license, the fact that it's something that is meant to contribute to public knowledge and be shared, I think, again, is something that we were really, you know, hoping for. And I think it's a real testament to Laurent and others that this is the ethos and the spirit of it. So I think it, you know, has made this really demonstrable contribution to knowledge, and seeing lots of different groups using it is quite important. So I just wanted to flag that, but I think there are lots of other elements that go into that. But I think that's really, again, speaks to the idea of the champion and the community to try to carry it forward. Aaron, do you want to jump in?
What was the question again? I feel like we talked. There's so many questions in the chat, and then just kind of listed there.
Don't read the chat now. Because
don't read the chat now.
Collected all the questions from the chat. So she's collecting the questions. She had a question with 3 topics. Maybe Caroline, you could repeat it for Aaron.
Of course, happy to repeat. So one was how the game was is being applied at the policy level, especially within the European Commission, whether there is any roadmap with some suggestions and key aspects to take into account when developing new adaptations of the game, and how can it lead to concrete decisions and actions.
Okay. Yeah. Again, I think that Alice and John have both spoken to this really well. And I can see Laurent is in the chat. I'm sorry, I can't not look over there. It's just going. But he's been doing an excellent job of answering some of these very same questions that have come up. How can we adapt this game? Where are the rules? And so a lot of the links are already there. And yeah, just in terms of making gameplay directly related to concrete decision making, I'm actually not convinced that that is the bridge that we want to build, right? There are different things that you can do with a game in terms of making decision making a different beast, right? Taking into account lots of different aspects and things. But I don't think you want to necessarily go from the game and say, okay, well, we did it here, so it must work here, because the game is not real life. You know, it's a simulation. It's meant to be a facsimile in which you can, again, experiment with your preconceptions of how things work. Who relates well to who under certain conditions. You can try them out there and experiment, and then bring that to the real world and find out, okay, how does my theory change in the game? Are those changes in my theory applicable and useful in real life? So building a direct bridge, I would back off of that, actually, and wouldn't sell a system that proposed to do that.
Yeah, and to just jump in on that point, I think the metaphor here is the test kitchen, right? It gives you a chance to test those recipes, to see what happens when these ingredients come together. If you choose to take what you did in the test kitchen and make it the marquee on your menu, that's totally your decision. But you might want to, again, think about, doing, another process as part of that. And again, the SES is one tool. So, a tool can do lots of different things, but a tool can't do everything. And so I think, having and being able to manage expectations about its applicability, but also seeing the potentiality for it to mutate and evolve. I would love it if, the SES to me was, completely unrecognizable in the next 5 years. Because it had evolved into something else or had mutated. And so I think the idea of it really is ready at hand, and there are amazing tools and there are roadmaps, and Laurent has posted them and Alice has talked about them. There are ways you can replicate, but I would also challenge everyone to see, how can you adapt it? How can you play with it? What can you add and bring to the community? And again, increase the shared knowledge around it as an approach.
Yeah, just one thing on that. I think John mentioned, like, kind of at the beginning of this, we're not game designers, or we weren't. We've become sort of game design mutants throughout these processes and others. But that process of learning, well, what does it take to do this, to make this interactivity and to engage the prototyping, all of that, that was such a rewarding process in terms of really helping, I think, both of us professionally understand, well, what's really going on underneath these games, and how do they work, and what are they doing within players' minds, and our decisions as designers are making that. So encouraging people to take the SES and really change it, make it their own, or make something that is completely their own. I think that's also a great work would be done. Games are here to stay. They've been with us for thousands of years, and they'll be with us hopefully for another thousands of years. But making new games is always a fruitful endeavor. Yeah.
Thank you. Maybe before we go to the next question, I have something also about the time and the investment in time. What I was surprised when I played it for the first time, and also with the debrief, etc., that coming from my background is management development and management education, I couldn't believe it was so short, because I'm used to have games, management games, etc., for, let's say, 2 days or a full day or even more, even rounds during a few months. So I understand that people, okay, let's invest time in it, but I must say, for me, it sounds really efficient and the impact of the learning is quite high. Is it what you can also have this experience, or maybe about to compare with other games? That this is quite an efficient way. Maybe John or Aaron, you're more in the game to compare with it. Aaron.
I'm sorry, I was responding to Tomas in the chat, who asked about this probable, preferable, possible futures. So John, if you're better prepared, I would I would hand it back to you. Thank you very much for the mic.
Okay, I'll take it. Yeah. Well, so again, the thing is, the SES has indirectly or informally shaped the game development work that Aaron and I have done beyond that, right? So we've built games for, as I mentioned, government of Singapore, the UAE government, worked a lot with the United Nations, different organizations, Red Cross, Red Crescent. And I'd say that the experience of the SES has always been something that we've shown to people. So the SES has certainly swayed. I do think that the SES was sort of the right approach at the right time, in that it was able to find that kind of sweet spot. We talk about, and it's interesting on the policy side, oh, it's too long, I don't have enough time. But certainly, Ivo, as you've said, on the business side, wait, I only need 3 hours. That's great. I can have the rest of the day and a half to do, to take my life back. So, it is relative to audience, but I think that getting that commitment of time is also quite critical. And of course, as we know, before we were doing everything virtually, we were competing for attention, right? So in workshops, people disappear, they're on their mobiles, they're not paying attention in the group. But if your turn comes around and you're not paying attention and you're on your mobile, you really feel it in a visceral way. So the game brings that attentiveness to the experience. And I think it is about trying to be, again, very upfront about the kinds of expectations. So being clear that the debrief is really critical and people need to invest time in the game and in that as well. But to be able to hold that space, and having a half-day exploration, of course, is not the same as a multi-day workshop, but it does allow, I think, people to get into a space to explore those different possibilities for the future. And again, as long as there's investment and clarity on that investment, then I think it can pay and has been shown to pay dividends.
Okay, thank you. Carolina, I see there's so many chats, 90 plus. What other questions?
Yes, indeed. It's very exciting to see a lot of interest from the audience. And thank you, Laurent, so much for also keeping up in answering some of these. I selected a couple which I think might not have been touched previously, so that's why I'm bringing those, and I think they will also be a great bridge for the next session. So we mentioned that this tool is very flexible and can be adapted to many topics and contexts. And one question was, how narrow and well-defined should the goal of the game be? So, for example, this is a question from Lisa Pace, and she's interested in sustainable growth and blue economy. Is this too broad to address in such a game, or how much adapting to this particular theme should be undertaken? And another question that we perhaps haven't touched upon is about the players. So we talked about the scenarios, a bit how to develop them. How do the players influence the exploration, and how do you prime them in the exploration mode? This was a question by Stilianos.
So I was paying attention. I feel like I just won my own mini game. I got a new fresh cup of coffee from my wonderful colleagues. Thank you. We talked a bit earlier about that last point. So the first question was, how focused do you want to be? And I think part of the answer lies in the organization really saying, well, what are our goals? Why are we going to use a game versus having a conversation versus, doing an online survey versus all the other ways that you can approach finding, a goal or a decision or whatever it is that you're looking for. So, so making the game super tightly focused, you can you can achieve a lot by doing that, but what do you sacrifice in the process? Because that is also part of the game, right? The game is broad and generalized because it's meant to inculcate like people having alternative perspectives, you know, either imagining them and then role-playing them, or role-playing one that you're familiar with, but then hearing the perspectives from others in a brief time span. You know, we say, oh yeah, 3 hours is a long commitment, and it is, but when you're talking about, you know, processes that could unfold over years, actually it's a good way to rapidly test, again, a theory of what works and what doesn't. So yeah, I think in terms of how tight do you want to focus the goal of the game or the narrative that's being told, it also is a question of, well, what are you willing to give up in order to do that? Because the game will ask you to make that trade-off. I can tell that coffee works right away.
No,
it's just like, oh yeah.
Carolina, we have 3 minutes, maybe one more question.
Perhaps, Ivo, maybe to comment a bit on the role of players. This is the other question. Yes, I mean, like I said, it's a bit of a social experiment. So the social mix you get around the table or online, even when it's played online, it does matter a lot. You know, the way people are outspoken, how much they enjoy role play. You know, it does influence the outcome. So you can have exactly the same materials, the same everything with two different groups of people and have very different ambience, very different outcomes. So yes, it does matter, but the role of the game master there is really important. So it should be really inclusive. So no matter what you do, everybody has to speak. So even shyer people have to somehow find, you know, the courage to speak up, and you as a game master can help them do it. You can prompt them, you can give them some ideas, examples. So again, there also the level of investment into being a good and skilled and trained game master pays off in the dynamics of the game.
Thank you. Carolina, maybe the very last question.
The very last question. So there are many, and now they are really going into specifics. There are a lot of questions, for example, about digitalizing the game, so online versions. And perhaps I can take this one and share that we will talk a bit, like we will go more into the details in the next session.
I think during this session it was really nice how the background, how the purpose and how it works will get very clear. The next session will be more clear about how the game itself works. We go more deep into the game and also the virtual one.
And I just shared the link to the next session in the chat, and that will start in about 15 minutes.
Okay, so let's yeah, and indeed we could go forward for hours, I think. But first of all, Alice, Aaron, and John, thank you so much for your contribution here. This is really an amazing session and very helpful to have more understanding, more background. The more you understand about the background and development, the nicer it even is to play it. It's also the case, I think. We have now a 15 minutes break. I would like to give the word again to Katarina. She will tell you how to come back in 15 minutes. And Carolina, thank you for the questions. Katarina.
Thank you very much, Ivo. So first of all, I would like to thank our beautiful speakers. Thank you very much for so much information and for such great discussion. Thank you also very much, Loha. His name was several times mentioned during the panel, and he was very, very active in our chat, commenting and also answering so many questions. And he is the main designer of the game. Basically, as he is a is a baby to him, now 6 years old. So thank you very much. And we will be hearing more from him for our next session. And thank you, of course, our participants as well for such an active chat. It was wonderful seeing so many questions and comments popping up. If you have still so many questions that we haven't answered, I can assure you that we will also have a Q&A for our second session, and our second session will become more concrete and more clear. So this one, we talked more about the bigger picture, the concept of serious game, the importance of foresight, and the developments of the game and its features. And in the next session, we will go and we will focus more on the different versions and the different adaptations of the games that are played until this day on 3 different levels. So we will have speakers that use it at policy level, speakers at the business level, and also that use it to this day in academia. So please do join us as well. You can see the link in our chat, but you can also have it in your invitation as an email. And I think that's all for now. We will meet 15:45 Central European time, so in 15 minutes. Thank you very much again.